welcome. This is such an exciting evening and a wonderful turnout, especially of students. It's so great to see you all out here. I'm Joshua Shanes. I am Associate Professor of Jewish Studies and Director of the Center for Israel Studies here at the College of Charleston. I'm absolutely delighted to invite you, to welcome you to this evening's events. Before we get started, as is our custom, I have announcements of upcoming events, which you can also join us for live and on Zoom. This Tuesday evening, we have a speaker, Ilan Yona, speaking about gender and second language acquisition, which will be again in this room at 7 p.m. And a week from Sunday at 10 a.m., we will have our very own Linda Gradstein, who is a very, very famous journalist from Israel, who's covering Israeli politics for NPR for many, many years. And she has spent time in Charleston over the years. She knows our community well at this point, and it's just going to be wonderful having her back. And she will be speaking Sunday morning, February 27th at 10 a.m. And as always for our Sunday events, there will be food provided if you're able to come an hour earlier. I'm looking at student faces. I am not seeing a lot of nodding. You can also log in on Zoom and stay in bed in your pajamas and watch.
And not get food.
And then you don't get the food though. You missed the lox and bagels. We cannot deliver lox and bagels to your dormitory rooms. I'm sorry. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome our guest, Abby Stein. I'm just going to read from the back of her book, Key Biography, and I'll say a quick word. Abby Stein is a Jewish educator, speaker, and trans activist. Born and raised in a Hasidic family of rabbinic descent, which is being very modest. She comes from pretty much the entirety of Hasidic aristocracy. She attended Yeshiva and completed a rabbinical degree in 2011. In 2012, Stein left the Hasidic enclave to explore a self-determined life, and in 2015 came out as a woman of trans experience. Since coming out, she has worked to raise awareness and support others with similar experiences. Her story has appeared in such a long list of journals. The book only captured a few of them, but obviously New York Times, New York Post, New York Magazine, Daily Forward, and many, many, many others. And can I announce the other thing that we mentioned? And there will be very soon coming out a major TV show and a major network coming out based on her life experiences. I'm looking forward to that as well. Welcome, Rabbi Abby Stein.
Thank you. Can I start with actually? I want to start by reading a part of the book. So give this to me.
The name of the book, by the way, which I'm sure will go in the chat box right now, is Becoming We. And it's a wonderful book. It's very interesting. It's called OTD memoir.
And actually, if you want to put in there's like a tiny URL. Oh, it's right up here. Okay. Damn it. So you don't need to okay, great. I feel like doing this. So first of all, hi everyone. I don't know how many of you were in Josh's class today. How many of you? Okay. So I did not do a good job convincing everyone else that was in the class to come, apparently. Oh, great. I'm a huge fan of pajamas and Zoom. I can neither confirm nor deny that I might have led services, and one that I really remember because there was a bit of the camera showed a bit more than I thought, was when I once led Tikkun Leil Shavuot, so like late on the Shavuot evening, we're talking 1 a.m, wearing a onesie, but a very unicorn, very fluffy onesie. And it was a tech study, and I was it was a very serious moment. And I was in bed with my girlfriend wearing a onesie. And yeah, so I'm a huge fan of that. So all of you in bed with onesies, good for you. So my book tour, so to speak, after this book came out, was cut short by what I like to call the apocalypse, or whatever we all call it, in March of 2020. But the first 3 months after the book came out, and I had what I would say is a privilege to engage with a lot of Jewish communities, several college campuses, several Hillels. I'm not saying this to be like you all are not special. I actually think every Hillel and every Jewish studies department in every college is really special. And I'm not just saying this to be nice to all of you, but I really mean it. It has been, today alone, I already managed to see 2 classes of the Jewish studies department, Josh's class, and Dr. By the way, you didn't tell me you were a doctor, which is, we'll have that conversation another time, but Dr. Walter's class as well. And it is really, I mean it, it's really special. But one of the things that I came to love to read when I am in a Jewish setting, whether it's a Hillel, a JCC, a synagogue, a Jewish study center, there's also in a Hillel, whatever it is, and I want to read that part from the book. And I will explain a bit why that is so special to me. So this is from the epilogue of the book. So for those of you who have read the book, I know a lot of people, when they get to the last chapter, got kind of upset or like disappointed because they were expecting more. But hey, the last line of the book literally is to be continued. And the point of this book is to make sure you buy the next one. So, and hopefully watch the TV show when it comes out in probably, I don't know when, we just started production, so we'll see. But this is in the epilogue. And for context a bit, and we'll talk a bit more about the community I come from and everything about that. But the context of this is I'm talking to my dad. My dad is not just Hasidic. My dad is, as Hasidic as it gets, literally and figuratively. I sometimes tell people Hasidic Judaism is in my blood, and it's actually not a metaphor. A part of my DNA, my genetics, literally comes from the founder of the Hasidic movement and so on. But for the context of what's important to understand here is my dad has never heard the word transgender before. And not just he didn't hear the word because he didn't speak English, there was no word for it in the language we did speak, or Hebrew, which my dad speaks, that does have words for it, though it's just transgender, but it's still used. He didn't know it. He had never met anyone who was having that experience. He didn't even know it existed. It wasn't a matter of transphobia. It wasn't a matter of hating trans people. It was not even being aware. So this is the context of what I want to read. Silence. I'm jumping into the middle of a conversation. So if this is a teaser for you and you want to understand more what's going on, you can get the book. Fine, I thought. Tati, which is the Yiddish name for dad, Tati doesn't believe that it's possible. He's going to say that being transgender isn't possible, that trans people don't exist, and he will brush us off. After all, I had heard far less religious people say such things. I couldn't expect Tati to be any different. This time, however, Tati surprised me. Okay, yes, he said. It is possible that there are people in the world whose souls and bodies are different. It can be real. But you need a tzaddik, a righteous person who has a Holy Spirit within him, to know that for sure. He didn't say Holy Spirit, he said Ruach HaKodesh, in case anyone conflates it with the Christian Holy Spirit. It's a very different idea. He seemed very sure of his assertion. I've seen 2 therapists and a doctor who all agree with me, I told him. They're not tzaddikim, they're not holy people, but they know it's true. And then came his ultimate pushback. But do you think that is okay with Judaism? He lamented. That's as much as I want to read right now. But that point stuck with me. I wrote it down only 4 years later, and it's been now over 6 years. And it's still very much, in his mind, the ultimate pushback wasn't going to be, maybe you're not who you are, maybe that. It was, do you think this is okay with Judaism? But he didn't say it in a way of a legitimate question. Like, it wasn't in a way of like, what's the parsha this week? It wasn't in a way of like, what, it was like, kind of like, as in like, we both know this is not okay with Judaism. Now, again, you can read the book. We had an answer. We got into a long conversation with him. But to me, what struck me over the past few years is the fact that I have visited hundreds of Jewish communities. And you can also have daddy issues, and it probably is not a lie. I think I do have daddy issues. But every time I walk into a building, a room, where I think all of you knew, were any of you unaware at all what the topic was going to be we're going to talk about tonight? You're all aware that transgender is going to come up. We're going to talk about queer people. And you're all here. I don't see anyone here in handcuffs, like no one forced any of you to be here. You might be getting extra credit for your class, but still. My biggest answer, the biggest response is by now thousands of people who have shown up both personally for me and in my experience, and in so many other Jewish communities who are saying that it's not just okay, this is part of our community. It's not just that there happen to be queer Jews. That is true whether you are Hasidic and ultra-Orthodox or whether you're totally secular. I don't care what your Jewish practices are. The reality that there are queer Jews is a reality that no one can argue with. But more than that is that we are part of this Jewish community. I said that wasn't in the class today, but I said it, and I really mean it. To me, it's not just that I happen to be transgender, happen to be queer, and I happen to be Jewish, and both of those are okay. I legitimately think, and that has been at least my experience, that being queer has made me a better Jew, being Jewish has made me a better and more comfortable queer person. And that has been the reality. So I wanted to open with this because to me, this is a very special moment. This is also the first in a very long time in person. I've done a lot of Zoom events, but this is the first, well, hybrid, but still like in person. And I want you all to know that hopefully you're all gonna enjoy yourself for the next hour, but also this means a lot to me. Each and every one of you showing up here, showing up on Zoom, it is very special, but it's not just for myself. I always like to say that every person that's an event, I imagine that's 10 people, because I hope you're gonna mention this to other people. And the message that you are sending, something as simple as this is part of who we are, this is part of our community, this is part of our lives, and you can never know how, at times, literally life-saving that can be. So I'm gonna ask something, sorry if that's cheesy, but I am a rabbi and we're known for doing stuff like that. I want you all to give a round of applause for each and every one of you. Not for me, we'll do that maybe at the end if you want. But I really mean it, and you all deserve applause for simply showing up, for ourselves and for our community. Now you can, now I'm not. I'm being cheesy. We can.
Just to remind people in the audience and also at home who are on Zoom, we will have time for Q&A about halfway through. We'll turn it over to the audience, both here in the audience and also on chat. I have my phone so I can keep track of the chat box. That's why it's here. I'm not grading papers or whatever. I'm keeping an eye in the chat box. And that will be in about 20 or 25 minutes. So why don't we begin by talking a little bit about where you grew up, what your life was like in that world. I think some people have some familiarity with what Williamsburg means, what Satmar or Visions in your case means, but others might not.
I'm actually curious, how do you feel about engaging the audience a bit on that?
You're welcome.
Okay.
This is your show.
Great. So how about, I want to get like 2 or 3 of you to tell me what you know or think you know about the Hasidic community. There really is no right or wrong answer here. It's just, if it's something you're not sure that that's true about it, you can think like, I think, or I've heard, any of that is true. But no questions at the moment. I just want to hear what you know. It could be something you know personally, something you have seen. It could be from watching Ultra-Orthodox or One of Us or one of the other, many other TV shows and stuff there online. Anything, what do you think you know? What do you know about the Hasidic community?
What's it?
Come on, I know that a lot of you have talks. Just don't be ashamed. Okay, well,
No, sorry, yes.
I love you, but I think I would prefer students.
I like you, I was just trying to like.
Oh, wait, all right, that's great.
It worked. I raise mine and other people.
But no, go for it. How about yeah, go for it. Start, yeah.
That it's very restrictive and insular.
That's a very general, but also very accurate statement. Thank you, yeah. It's not that I don't want to hear from the staff, I've had experience sometimes where it ends up being just the staff talking and yeah.
I think it's like most interesting and distinct that it's like very much its own, like, not just community, but like it's so secluded from everything else, like literally an enclave on its own within wherever that community is located. So I think that's a very big thing.
There's something about Josh in that documentary, because I think literally every time, like last night, today, and again, that comes up again, The Life Apart. I think you mentioned it last night.
Yeah, those of you in my class, we're going to watch some of that in class.
One of the earliest documentaries about the Hasidic community in New York is called A Life Apart. And I think that's a very accurate description of the community.
And the new book about your neighborhood, Williamsburg, is called A Fortress in Brooklyn. A Fortress in Brooklyn, yeah, a fortress, yeah.
I was going to say that the standard story is followed, like women are in the kitchen, men go study Torah, and women take care of the kids, and so on and so forth.
That is a very accurate statement for most people in the Hasidic community. My parents kind of took it to a whole new level. I never saw my dad even make toast. Like, he absolutely did nothing at home. My parents have 13 kids. We were gonna get to that anyway. My parents have 13 kids. My dad changed the diaper once in his life. Not once for every child, once in his life, period. And that was after my younger brother cried for 6 hours. Meaning, yes, it's messed up in a very accurate description. Okay, I think we're gonna bring this back home, so to speak. some of the things, and I think an easy way, and I mentioned that today during the class as well, but I think an easy way to look at it, the Hasidic community is not just another fundamentalist religious community. The US is blessed or cursed, depending on how you look at it, with fundamentalist, hateful, dare I say, sexist and homophobic and transphobic religious communities. That wouldn't necessarily make the Hasidic community unique. I think where it becomes, and what was your name? Who's the one who said the, yeah, was that, oh, is that Glory? Okay, I couldn't see that. Yeah. Yeah, so like very similar to what you said, it goes a lot deeper than that. I wasn't allowed to listen to music outside of the Hasidic community. But the band that I was forbidden from listening to was the Miami Boys Choir. Do any of you know what that is? It's an Orthodox, boys-only choir, but they sing in English. So we were not allowed to listen. That was the music that I remember being forbidden. I don't know who was very popular in the 90s and the early 2000s, probably like the Backstreet Boys and Britney Spears. These were not forbidden music. I was unaware that they existed. The only newspapers we had at home, some Hasidic families wouldn't even allow newspapers, period, but we had, the only newspapers were two newspapers, both of them written in Hasidic Yiddish. One of them is called the Zeitung, which literally means the newspaper, and one of them was called the Yid, which literally means the Jew, which almost sounds like an anti-Semitic newspaper. But these were both heavily censored. I would say maybe like 3/4 of the newspaper was just like community news, like the most mundane, and like this like small rabbi who has a community of 20 people probably, the kid got married and that person died and that person had a child. That was the only news we had access to. Forget about radio, TV, movies, once again, also not something forbidden, something I was unaware. I couldn't name you, until I left, I couldn't name you a single movie out there. The only movies that we ever watched was one of them that actually have her, maybe we'll show it later, which was Cousins' Weddings. And that was even that we were not allowed to watch during the year. We had like a few evenings, Christmas Eve, called Nittelnacht. I'm not gonna go into that exactly why. And like usually maybe on holidays, the intermediate days of Pesach and Sukkot, Passover and Sukkot. But most of the time you wouldn't even watch those. But that's the only thing we watched. And again, the other things weren't necessarily forbidden. It was being so unaware that they exist. And are you like controlling the, or can I do it from here? Is this? Oh, okay. No, we're not gonna, we're gonna skip these. No, we're gonna skip these. I got it. But here. It's one of the things that I wanted to say. The goal of the community was trying to mirror something that never really existed the way they see it, but they were trying to recreate this hypothetical religious utopia, or in my opinion, dystopia, that supposedly existed in the 18th century shtetls. So shtetl, some of you might have heard that word before, it means village in Yiddish, but in this context, it refers to this place where everyone follows all the rules, everyone wears all the clothes, everyone eats gefilte fish and shalom every Shabbat, and so on. That kind of very exotic place. And what happened was, specifically after the Holocaust, and for reasons that were partially, I think, a response to the Holocaust, partially a response to the fact that for the first time after the war, the majority of Hasidic people were living in major cities surrounded by very big Jewish communities. So it's not by chance that if you look at Hasidic communities today, the biggest threat that they consider to their way of life are not non-Jews. They consider non-Orthodox Jews, or more specifically non-ultra-Orthodox Jews, to be the biggest threat to their lives. And in many ways, the more traditional you are, the bigger of a threat you are to their way of life. But it's not by chance that they all ended up in places where they are very big Jewish communities. You got in Israel, for example, the biggest ultra-Orthodox town is Bnei Brak, which is literally a stone throw away from Tel Aviv. In New York, obviously, you got Brooklyn, which is in New York City, the city with the most Jews of anywhere in the world, and so on. So in their minds, they had to create this extremely closed-off community if they want to survive. As a result, and I think that is a very important detail, they created something that wasn't necessarily planned. like as I mentioned, all of the things that I wasn't supposed to do, that I wasn't allowed to touch. There's no like manifesto, there is no master document where you can look on that will tell you what exactly makes the community Hasidic, and specifically all of those cultural restrictions that are not part of Jewish law. We're going to see in the video later, you see a grandfather dancing with his granddaughter, and they're not holding hands. Even by the most strict interpretation of Jewish law, you are allowed to do that. In my family, if two of my married sisters, which also meant that two of my brother-in-laws, were there for a Shabbat dinner, the men ate in the dining room and the women ate in the kitchen. They wouldn't even eat at the same table. That's a cultural thing. There is no Jewish book that you can open up of law that will tell you that. There's no laws against watching television, believe it or not, or against listening to the radio, or against listening to most music. Mostly, I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty details. It's a very reactionary community, and that is something that existed for my whole life, my whole childhood. Like when I was, and I think I mentioned it a bit in the book, in the late 90s, when the internet became very popular, suddenly there was a whole new level that was added to the identity that by now, one of the things that you can say about most Hasidic communities, minus Chabad, so we're not going to talk about Chabad, is like one of their definitions is like, they don't go to college, they dress like in the 18th century, and they have some issue with the internet. Supposedly, they don't want you to have any internet access. I didn't have any internet access until I started leaving. Most of my siblings still don't have internet access. And that's a whole like added part to almost to their identity that was added as a response to the internet. In the 60s, that was television, and so on. So they constantly react to everything that's going on around the world. I have her a bit, if you all can see this, but which is also a very defining definition, which is a family life. And there are some nice parts to it, but the defining details for me, I have 12 siblings, which wasn't necessarily a big family. It was maybe a bit bigger than average, but that's it. I knew families with even more kids. I have 5 older sisters, I have 4 younger brothers and 3 more sisters. And then the other part that really defined my childhood was the family. Meaning, both of my parents are part of Hasidic dynasties. So, the Hasidic community has been ruled by kind of a monarchy, well, several monarchies that by now are all related to each other, like literally all related to each other, and they've been in control for mostly for the past 200, but it became even more intense last 150. And as you go, by now, if you're not part of that rabbinic dynasty, it's impossible for you to become a community leader. At least not a Rebbe, which is, should I go on to explain the difference between a Rebbe and a rabbi, or should we keep moving?
A grand rabbi.
I sometimes say an Ayatollah, which is what people get sometimes, like a spiritual, communal, and by now, Rebbes are also institutional leaders in every sense of the word. Another very defining character for myself and for the Hasidic community is very early and arranged marriages. I met my ex for about 20 minutes, and then we were engaged. But even when we met, the engagement was already a done deal. It was already going to happen no matter what. My parents are in their 50s and have about 60 grandkids. Last I counted, I've lost track. So very big families, arranged marriages from a really young age. I personally got engaged when I was 18, had a son a year later. And that's where I started going, I guess you could say, off the derech, off the path. I got divorced at 21. Do we want to focus more on that? Because I can keep talking just about the background, or we can move on a bit. Okay.
By the way, it wasn't clear from your book. So how old were you? You're third generation American.
Depending on how you count. Okay.
Your parents were born in America.
No, not my dad isn't. On my dad's side, I'm the first. This is going to be interesting. On my dad's side, I'm the first generation born here, but 5th generation living living in New York City. So back to my great-great-grandfather, who was born in what was then Poland, now Ukraine, who survived the war, ended up in Brooklyn, and then like my great-grandfather, my grandfather, and my dad. But my dad actually was born in Israel. So my mom was born here, my mom's family was here, but even my mom is the 1st generation. So yeah, depending on how you count.
So somewhere between first, second, generation American. How old were you when you learned to speak English fluently?
I was 20, well, fluently? Well, like 22, 23. I didn't speak English at all Yeah, the education system, almost forgot. That's a very important detail. The education system is, specifically if you attend a boys' school, and I'm putting that in quotation marks, which is like the way you were assigned at birth, the education is almost exclusively a religious education. We had the only we used to call it English, which was English and math. We had from 4th to 8th grade, 1 hour a day. The extent of English went to about a 3rd grade level. The most advanced math we ever studied was long division, and that was it. Past 8th grade, we had no general education whatsoever. We studied in Yeshiva, which was which is a mix of high school / seminary. We had 11 hours a day of studying. Our study schedule is 11 hours. I'm not saying everyone studied the whole 11 hours, but that was the schedule. And none of that involved anything written in any alphabet that wasn't the Hebrew alphabet. So we got Yiddish, we got Hebrew, we even got Aramaic. So in many ways, I grew up trilingual. I kind of could communicate in 3 languages growing up, but English was not one of them, living in New York City. But and it is true, you will have people now who are 4th and 5th generation born in New York, Hasidic people. So not just living there, but born there, who still don't speak English.
Amazing. Are you involved in the
Amazing or bad, depending on who you ask.
Towards that point, are you involved in efforts in New York to try to impose
Yafet.
Yafet, yeah.
Yeah, so-
you can explain. Please.
Yeah, I've done a lot of work for them. A lot of you can find online speeches that I've given at their protest rallies. So there's an organization in New York City called Yafet, which, it's kind of a pun. It's supposed to be an acronym which stands for Young Advocates for Fair Education, but it's also a pun on Yafet, which is one of the 3 sons of Noah in the Bible. And the Talmud says that that in the temple there were certain things written in Greek because ultimately, which was supposed to be, they believed that the Greeks were descendants of that son of Noah. Anyway, but the point being, it's meant to be look, even the Talmud has Greek words in it, and why can't we study English? But anyway, we have been working a lot to not even changing the law, which is where it's so frustrating, because New York has a law which is colloquially called substantially equivalent, which means that there's been a law in the books since the early 20th century, which requires every school, public or private, to offer an education that is substantially equivalent to the standards set by the New York Board of Regents, which is what oversees the public schools and administers state exams and so on. Part of those requirements are English and math and science and history, social studies and so on. Now, the Hasidic community, again, for those who go attend boys' schools, they teach English and math, which is kind of a joke. But the other subjects are not even on the list. We didn't have a single science class, no history. Forget about general history. Even Jewish history wasn't really a class. And no social studies, none of that was a part of the curriculum. So it's technically against the law, but for a very long time, city or state, depending on who is supposed to enforce it, was ignoring it. So Yafet, which was founded by a friend of mine who also grew up Hasidic and has left, and we have been trying really hard, started with a lawsuit and trying to get the city and state Department of Education to actually step in. And right now, they are supposed to be releasing new guidelines any day now, which has been like that for 4 years. So it's very frustrating.
It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing.
It's really bad.
Anyone like you, like Naftali, any of these people can tell you that it's...
It's a joke. It's just who are they trying to fool? There is no good education. And in many ways, by law, it's considered child abuse. Not offering your kids a basic education is considered child abuse. And it should be. And I think it is. But a big part of that is because that's how they keep people in the community. It took me, after leaving, it took me 3 years to be able to go to college, which were because I had to study literally the basics, which if you ask me, were 3 years wasted that I should have gotten as a child. But that's not a bug. As I say, it's a feature. Part of it is to keep you in check, to make sure that make it hard for people to leave because you don't even speak the language.
I imagine like Naftali Moster, who runs Yafet, I imagine you get called anti-Semites a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Fake Jew and things like this.
If you criticize them, you're anti-Semitic. It's a bit like, we're not going to talk politics too much, but it's a bit about a certain specific political thing, which is whenever you say something certain people don't like, you're anti-Semitic. They take it to a whole new level.
It's a badge of honor.
Yeah.
So I have some questions. People are asking about both what you take from your background, and I remember when Shalom Dean was here, he talked about, and he left and he needed to leave, but he still talked about how people who leave have a sort of nostalgia for certain aspects of it that they miss. So I'm getting questions about what you might miss and what you might like to recapture, and also how you celebrate Judaism today.
I have the perfect answer for that question. So first of all, what I like to say is that I don't miss anything. If I want something, I do it. And it's true, like, you're all welcome to follow me on Instagram, shameless self-promotion, but not really, just if you want to. And you will see that I cook 5-course meals on every Friday. No one forces me, even when I'm by myself. I'm doing it, I'm doing it because I really enjoy it. I really like the very, greasy, probably unhealthy, but really delicious Hasidic food. So I don't miss it. I do it. And so the same goes with holidays, the same goes with text. I'm literally just got a publishing offer for a book that's gonna be primarily Jewish text about LGBTQ stuff, but still like very heavy in Jewish text. And I do that because I like it. And that has been, in a lot of ways, that has been my approach to Judaism and to life in general. I don't have to miss anything. If I like something, I do it. So actually, going back for a second, my philosophy, so to speak, when it comes to Judaism, is that I'm not observant. I don't observe anything. I celebrate. I don't observe Shabbat. I celebrate Shabbat. But it's not just a matter of like semantics on how you define it. It's also, in reality, it's also how you look on customs, how you look on rituals, how you look on Judaism. Instead of being, oh, these are certain things that you need to observe, and some people who are observant might not feel about it this way, but at least for me personally, I want to celebrate it. And the reason why I went to this slide and what I want to show right now is because I feel the same thing about the LGBTQ community. I've been told many times, as Naftali has been and many other people, to move on. I love the Hasidic community, move on, leave the Hasidic community alone. You came out as trans, great, move on, stop talking about it. Like, move on, move on. And what I always tell people is, I agree, I need to move on. And I need to, but by moving on, I mean moving on from talking about tolerance and acceptance to talking about celebration. Tolerance is really good when you talk about lactose or about nuts, not about people. And I think if there's a Jewish message about people, it is that we need to celebrate people. And I really believe that. And to talk about how I celebrate my Judaism and how much of it I've taken, I'm going to show this video. I'm not going to show the whole thing. The whole thing is about half an hour. This is about 5 minutes of it. But before I do that, how many people in the room had a bar mitzvah? Which traditionally, like, boys have a bar mitzvah at the age of 13. How many of you had a bar mitzvah? Okay, how many of you had a bat mitzvah? How many of you had both? Well, I'm a super Jew. But also, I think it's a good example of the kind of Judaism that I want, the kind of Judaism that I celebrate. And also, Joey, you will see, because one of the songs, so this is a ritual that I had to create. Oh yeah, okay. This is a ritual that I had to create by myself. It didn't really exist. So we brought in a lot of traditional parts. There's like a walking down the aisle. There's a reading of the Torah and everything. Again, the full video is on YouTube. It's called The Celebration of Life and Transition. This is just 4 minutes of it. But also the song that they sing as I'm like walking down is a Hasidic song. Just to give an example. Go for it.
In our tradition, leaving Egypt wasn't an historical event alone. In our tradition, leaving Egypt was a personal, existential leaving as well. Whenever we leave a narrow place, a place of constriction, painful servitude, a place where we are not authentically who we are, that leave-taking, that transitioning is an exodus, is a freedom walk. So at this moment, we have risen, we have stood now in order to be in community with our very dear, dear, dear friend and member and teacher, who will make a blessing of transition and walk slowly through this space, this narrow space, to a place of Torah, to a place of reception, and to a place of nooning. We turn to face. Ufros chavivi Adonai, et sukkah shlom lecha. Yigalena, yigalena. Ufros chavivi Adonai, et sukkah shlom lecha. Yeshiva, Chavotenu, Bimotenu, and we want to bless their ancestors. Bless this morning. One who has come forward to receive a new name in our tradition, to be known, the Israel, to be known amongst this community and all communities, as Abigail Chava bat Menachem Mendel v'Chaya Shendel. Abigail Chava. May the merit of all of those who have walked from a narrow place into an expansive place be with you. May the signature of the one who is known as Emet, the one who is known as truth, be with you as you have now embraced, first to yourself and now in Kahal Rav amongst those who love you and know you. Embrace the truth of who you are and the joy of who you are. Abigail. Amen. Oh, Simone, Simone, oh, Masal, oh, Gehenna, no, Ekol Israel,
It keeps going, but I didn't just come here to show you all videos. But I think that answers the question a bit, at least. Obviously, we can talk about it forever. And now in this, a book that I'm working on right now is going to be a lot more focused on that as well. And I actually have some texts even here, just for examples. This is the screenshot that you see over there. That's a text from a book called Transgender Woman. But this is a text from Yechiel Mechel Zlotchev, who is one of the earliest Hasidic rabbis, who also happens to be a direct ancestor. And that's a screenshot. I showed this to my dad when I came out to him. You can see like the time when I took the screenshot, like phone is charging 11:42 p.m. It's the night before I came out to my dad. And I took this screenshot to show it to him. And we're not going to go into the whole text, but at times the female would be in a male body because of the reasons of Gilgal, which means reincarnation, the soul of the female would come to be in a male. It's not the only one. Maybe we'll get a bit more to this. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. This is a poem from a 30th century rabbi, but you look on the bold part. Cursed be the one who announced to my father it's a boy. Oh, but the Arzina made me, created me instead of it. Is that a fly? Okay. Created me instead of fair woman. And the examples go on. There's this, which some of you might know about, that 6 to 8, I'm going the wrong way again, 6 to 8 different genders in the Talmud. And this mission is one of those examples. Point being, I love Judaism. I don't love everything about anything. And I think anyone who looks on anything that is thousands of years old and has been around, and there's so many different opinions, say you love everything about it, that's impossible. Because as you all know, 2 Jews, 5,000 opinions, whatever, however it goes. But there's so much beauty, and I'm really a big fan of finding something that works for it. And I spoke to some students over dinner and I said that, but I'm gonna repeat that because it's really important. You don't need a label. And I think that's true for your Judaism. If there is a label that works for you, that's very good. I don't think labels are always wrong. I think labels could help us. Like I very proudly identify with the label trans because it helped me realize who I am, and it helps me make sense of who I am. There are some people who others might want to put in under that as being trans who don't want to use that label, and that's fine as well. But what I said is like, you know, we're all used to labels being on clothes, and that's really nice because we put the clothes in the closet, but we shouldn't put humans in the closet. So humans don't need labels. Humans, like, we really are not obligated to label ourselves. And I think that goes for Judaism, and that goes for sexuality, for gender, whatever it is. So I wouldn't necessarily identify with a specific label, but to find something that works and not tolerate it, not observe it, that's what you want to do, but to celebrate it. And that's my approach. And I take a lot of things from my background. Yeah.
I think it's time now for questions from the audience, both here in the room first and foremost, and then from the chat box as well. That is open, so please enter your questions in the chat box. And do you mind if I walk around?
Oh, please, yeah.
I'll pull a foot down you.
I'm not a fan of controlling people, don't worry.
So when you got married,
Yes.
okay, when you got married, you were in your role as a man, right? So for you to get divorced in your community because you were a man, was it easier as opposed if you were the woman who wanted to leave? Would that have been harder for her?
I can't really answer this because I didn't want to get divorced. That was not a choice for either one of us. It's something that it's going to be in the follow-up to a memoir, which I'm not sure when it's going to come up and come out. It's going to be explored a lot in the show as well. We were kind of forced by my in-laws' families to get divorced, and it wasn't really a choice for either one of us. So it's not, yeah. But it really depends. When a couple, Hasidic couple, and one of them leaves, divorce isn't really divorce is the go-to for almost always. It doesn't matter if it's the man or woman, wife or husband. It's always the go-to. If you choose to get divorced, most of the time it's not a problem for either one, and there have been, while technically by the letter of Jewish law, while a woman can be divorced forcibly and a man can't, there actually is a cherem, which is like a law, against, at least for Ashkenazi Jews, against forcibly divorcing a wife. So it's not really, it's supposed to be equal, and most of the time it is. There are stories when husbands hold back a get, but there's also stories of a wife can also hold back a get. For a husband, it could be, if the wife doesn't want to get a get, there is kind of a workaround, but it's actually very complicated. Anyways, we're not going to go into it. But it didn't really, for me, it was, we were both forced into it, and we didn't much have a choice either way.
How did you come up with your book title?
Thank you. I like this one. It's unique. I don't get that a lot. Sorry, what's your name? Charlie. It was kind of a collaborative effort between myself and the editor. And we were just talking about like what could work. So first I was thinking like Becoming. So I think this is around the time that Michelle Obama published her book Becoming. So that was on my mind subconsciously. But I felt like Becoming is really what this is about. Specifically, ultimately the book became a lot about coming of age as opposed to actually coming out. It was a lot about kind of coming into myself as opposed to being. Like there's a lot to write about being the part, but that will be like in a second. So this was a lot about becoming. And then originally I was going to be becoming Abby, and then we were like, that's not catchy enough. And then we started thinking, so my middle name, both legally and in Hebrew, is Chava. So Eve is the, mistranslation from a mistranslation of Chava. So, and people like identify Eve a lot with like, that first woman, or what according to some rabbis is a mistranslation also of the Torah, but according to some like the woman coming from the man. So there was a lot of like meaning to it, a lot of symbolism. And also we thought it was very catchy. Becoming Eve definitely sounds better than becoming Abby. So so that was pretty much what it is. But it is my middle name. A lot of people don't realize that. That's actually the reason I put it on the cover. I rarely use my middle name. I use it to be called up to the Torah, and then it's on my passport, which is just, I love when airline people at the airlines, which is usually the only time when my middle name is on and they try to pronounce it. I've heard so many pronunciations from Shava to Kava to Hava. It's a lot of fun, but it's Chava. So the reason I put it on the cover was because I was hoping people would get that connection, but I think you have to speak Hebrew to really get it. But yeah.
So in the book you mentioned that when you were speaking about the Hasidic community, and you kind of said that you don't want people to necessarily hate the Hasidic community.
I don't want people. Yeah.
For what it is. And I was wondering if you have found there's a bit of a struggle within people when they learn about it, and a struggle to understand how you can like say what you say about the Hasidic community and not necessarily hate it, and that I'm wording this awkwardly because I feel like there may not be a good answer, but that awkward tension there.
So here's the thing. I write about that in the introduction to the book as well, and I felt like most stories written, and there have been, ironically, the past few years, and I think Josh might know even more about those books than I do, but there has been a bit of a slew, a bit of a, not revival, a renaissance almost, of exploring the Hasidic community for people trying to do it with a bit of a neutral lens. The problem with that a bit is, this is a community that by nature, it's not about gatekeeping, it's just by nature, it's not a community that you can really study from the outside. You could try, and I think a lot of the books recently have focused like on neighborhood or on communities, which is a bit easier, like find, but if you want to really describe the community, if you were never part of it, it's almost impossible, because even if you're going to find people who want to talk to you, by definition, Hasidic people who talk to non-Hasidic people in depth are on the fringes. Not because there's something wrong with them, but simply because the community doesn't encourage friendships with outsiders. So, but what I have found is that most books that cover the Hasidic community fall into one of two traps. They either overly exoticize it, and there are several of the recent books written by outsiders that try to do that, or overly demonize it. And I'm not going to go into, there's enough TV shows and books out there that do that. And I said that to my publisher before we even got the contract for the book, and I'm like, if you're expecting this to be a hit piece, I'm not going to do that. And I knew it was going to be really hard. And ultimately, I think I have, at least from the feedback that I've heard from people, a lot of people read a book and come off as like, oh, I was expecting you to be a lot more hateful, and it isn't. And there isn't I can't think of an exact recipe how to do it other than being honest. So I tried, and we're doing this now with the show even more intensely, tried as much possible to also show the beautiful parts. Now, there are reasons why the percentage of people leaving has gone from maybe 1% about 30 years ago to somewhere around 10% right now, which is a really big jump. It's still 90% of people who stay there. And I can't, again, unscientifically, I would assume that about 50% of people who stay are not necessarily happy, and if it was easy for them to leave, they would leave. But there is a very big percentage who are very happy and very content. And some of it could be ignorance is bliss, but also there is a lot of good parts of the community. I have some of my best memories about a holiday. Like the way I do holidays to this day is that I host them, and I try to structure them a lot like we did at home. And there's a lot of beautiful parts to it. They really take care of their own. Just one example that I think a lot about, I have a cousin whose mom died of cancer. And then he went ahead and he founded an organization called RCCS, Rofa Cholim Cancer Society. But what they do is every person of the Hasidic community who gets cancer, they will get you the best insurance possible, pay the premiums, and there's no questions asked. It doesn't matter how rich you are, how poor you are, how much money you have, they cover everything. They have one of the best ideas of food banks that I've ever seen anywhere in the world is this thing that I used to see a lot in Williamsburg growing up. When you went to a Hasidic grocery and you went to check out, there were cards at the register that you can do that were kind of donation cards. But the way it worked is that you took a $5 card and it was added to your bill, and you gave $5, but then it went into an account. And there was this organization that was working with the groceries to constantly wipe off. So a lot of community groceries will have this, you can have an account, and you can, I don't even know how it's called in English, a tab, we call it Aufschreiben. Yeah, you write it on. And that organization would totally secretly, without anyone knowing, just using that money people donate, just wipe off the like tabs of people who were in need. Just to give like one example, and that's like a very normal thing. They have, if you go to any hospital in any Hasidic area where there's a big Hasidic people, there's going to be something called the Bikur Cholim room, which is this room that you can go in, and it's stocked to the brim with food, but not like scraps, like good and fresh. Like if you go on a holiday, there's going to be a 5-course gourmet meal. And there's no questions asked. You don't have to show an ID. You don't have to, you go in there and you get food. And I can go on. Like, it's a lot of love. Well, I wouldn't call it love because it is very conditional, and I think conditional love isn't love. But they do take care, like, this is just one example. There are positive parts. So I think ultimately what I try to show is to not just to show the negative parts, but to tell a story. And some of it comes out really negative. And there's things that I didn't even get to talk about, which is like abuse. And like, to give an example, Footsteps, which is a nonprofit that has really helped me. And it's a nonprofit that helps people who are leaving the ultra-Orthodox community. They're not trying to get people to leave, but they help people who leave anyway. Their website is footstepsorg.org, if anyone wants to look it up. And they did a survey in 2015 of their members, and somewhere around 50% of their members said that they were abused in the community, either physically or emotionally. And so on. Like, there's a lot of negative things, but I really believe that simply try to tell the story and tell everything. I'm not hiding the mischief that I did as a child. Some of you have read it, so you know how I invented, sorry if this is gross, but I invented a recipe of how to create something that looks and smells like poop, that wasn't poop, to make trouble in school. Meaning, like, I was thinking a lot, do I really want to tell that? I don't come up really nicely looking at that story, but I wasn't trying to hide anything. And I think that is the approach that people should take when talking about communities like that. Someone asked me at dinner, I don't remember who it was, if I think they're a cult. And my go-to is I sometimes call them a culture, because they're very close to it. And they do fit the definitions of cults a lot. But I do think compared to at least the cults that you see on TV, it's not purely evil, and it's not meant to be evil. Like, the people who really believe in it are not there to be like, I'm going to control everyone. I'm going to do whatever I want. A lot of people mean well. At the same time, though, I also think that if telling stories about a certain community makes the community coming off really bad, the problem is not mine. The problem is not the person's telling the story. It's on that community. Because a lot of people will be like, there's so much anti-Semitism. Why do you have to tell negative stories about us? I'm not telling negative stories. I'm telling stories. If you're saying that comes off negative, okay, then maybe you should do something about it. And I think that is, anyway, that's the very long, but actually very short answer. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
How about we do one at a time then, so I don't lose track?
Oh, no, totally. The first one is, once you did leave the community, you said that you hadn't really, I guess, consumed outside media. When you left, what kind of media did you end up consuming, and what did you think of it?
That's very interesting. It was a journey. One of the earliest like online things that I did, like something TV, I was part of a docu-series on Showtime called Darknet. You can look it up. If you have Showtime, it's still on Showtime. You can find it. I was in season 1, episode 8. Okay. But it was about the internet. And it wasn't me, but the narrator made a statement of like, imagine getting on the internet for the first time, but not in 1996 as the internet is starting, but in 2013. And they said the numbers, I don't remember, they're like millions of pages and websites and TV shows. And like, in some ways it was kind of a lot of fun. Like suddenly there was something called Netflix, and there's just like, relatively speaking, an infinite amount of things to watch and a world to learn. And so I have a cousin who left about 1.5 years ago. And did any of you watch Unorthodox, the TV show? So I think it was a great show at telling the story that it was trying to tell. But one of the more unrealistic things in it was the fact that she leaves and like literally just gets a bag, gets on a plane, and like and a few days later has an audition at a prestigious conservatory. That doesn't happen to anyone, but also most people don't leave a TV version. Most people don't pack a bag and leave. I have a cousin who literally did that. She lived in Williamsburg, she packed a bag and came to be with me for a few weeks. and she left. And then I was like helping her, you know, find a world, whatever. Now she's in college and everything. But at the time, and it was so interesting realizing through her eyes what I was going, like everything is new. A theater is amazing, a bar, like simply walking down the streets of Manhattan or of any place, getting on a road trip and not having to worry 10 times over where you're gonna get your next meal because you can't just stop in a rest stop and getting food. Like so many, like every small detail. And like for me, so I also had friends who helped me. The first movie that I watched, which is a friend of mine who I think knew me before I knew myself, and this was in 2012, summer of 2012, and she took me to watch Magic Mike. Just by now very on brand, and I'm to this day not even sure how she knew. Like I wasn't talking anything about gender or sexuality. I didn't know anything. That was the first movie I ever watched, and I remember sitting. I wasn't even the front row, probably like row 5 or 6. Are any of you? None of you are from Rockland County, New York. Okay. Anyway, so there's like this big theater there, and to me, it felt like the feeling like I have now when I watch a 3D movie. I've just never seen like there's this scene, this one of these. I think it's the opening scene, one of the scenes where this male stripper like gets out of the bed, and to me everything was just so big. I thought he was gonna literally like I literally went like I thought he was gonna walk onto me, kind of like that. And it wasn't a 3D movie; it was a normal. I mean, it was a very interesting experience. The first TV show that I watched in full was How I Met Your Mother. And then I learned English and a lot about culture from between How I Met Your Mother, Friends, and Gilmore Girls, which was actually very problematic because my idea of American culture was very unrealistic for a long time because it was based on all those shows. Music is one of the things that I still haven't. I listen to a lot of like popular music, but I still can't tell you, like when I was in college, during opening week, during like orientation, one of our icebreakers were going around and asking, say what's your go-to song to sing in the shower. Mine at the time, and I'm not ashamed to say to this day, is high holiday songs, Hasidic high holiday songs. And for a while I tried to fight it, and then I got to a point, you know what, I think Hasidic music is cool, I don't care, I'm gonna stick to it. Anyway. What was the second question?
Anyway, the other question was, you mentioned you had a kid.
Still do.
Yeah, well, yeah. Do you keep in touch?
So my kid is one of the things I don't like to talk about publicly. There's nothing wrong with asking, I just don't talk publicly about his life or my relationship.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're going to pull up in just a moment hours anyway, although I think you're okay staying.
I'm okay staying, yeah, for another, yeah. I think we were supposed to go until 8:15, no?
Is that what it is? I'm happy. I got nowhere to start late, let's go 2 more minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was struck in the book by the relationships you do describe, and very openly so. It was very, actually, I think be so bold to say, the relationship you described with your ex-spouse was really quite lovely, actually.
What's even exactly, it was an arranged marriage. Man, I will say I knew her family. We were third cousins, which is not even that close. I have 2 of my sisters are married to my mom's first cousins, and in my extended family, there's 2 uncles and nieces that are married. So third cousin wasn't, but that might have helped a bit that we kind of knew each other. But yes, it was. We really got along, which is why I was when was it Cheer that you asked about divorce? You asked about divorce. It wasn't our choice, which is also surprising. And I didn't know it at the time, but we got divorced in the spring of 2013. But already about 7 months before that, I don't know what it was on the calendar, but I know it was the day before Rosh Hashanah of 2012. My ex-mother-in-law told my ex to leave me. And my ex just said no, which is extremely powerful, thinking that we weren't even married for 2 years at the time. It was less than 2 years. We were both in 20. We were just 20 years old. And it was, but I think that was almost more chance than anything else. But I would say even that, like today, knowing everything I know about myself and everything I know about other people, if I would have met my ex now, I don't know, on Bumble or in a bar, we might have been friends, but I don't think we would have ever dated. Meaning, like, we were friends. I don't know if I would even call it love. Like, the only real love story that I had is also in the book. No, I'm not going to give too many spoilers. That was back in Yeshiva. But I don't know if I would call it love. But we definitely got along really well.
Somebody asked on the chat box about the role of your being a trans woman played in your exit. And you've answered this, I know, during the class time, but maybe for the audience now.
So it didn't actually. I left in, well, it started 2012. So I remember, I don't know what it was on the calendar, I think it was in January 2012, but I remember the Shabbat, it was Shabbat Ve'era, Parshat Ve'era, so it was the Torah portion of that week, was the second Torah portion of the book of Exodus, I remember it very clearly. That was the first Shabbat I used my phone, so I count that as a bit like milestone of like starting the actual like process of leaving. It took another like year to actually like leave, but then I didn't come out until November 2015. So there was like this 3-year period where I wasn't religious and I was like leaving the community, even started college. I started college in the fall of 2014 before actually coming out. So I didn't leave just because of my identity. I think a lot of my searching and a lot of my like reading books that I wasn't supposed to from a really young age was triggered, kind of was caused, like my identity pushed me to do it. But I left because I had very strong disagreements in theology and philosophy and in the way the community is and so on. So it didn't really play, it played a big role in my parents stopping to talk to me. Because my parents did, I wouldn't say they accepted it, but until I came out over those 3 years, we still had a talking relationship, which ended when I came out. So it did play a role in that, but not in leaving. By the time, and I think that was very healthy and very good, that by the time I left, I lost all of my friends when I left the community. And then by the time I came out 3 years later, I already had built up a new support group through like footsteps. I was already part of Roman at the time. There was a 2-year period when I hated everything Jewish. But then about 2 years after leaving, I joined this community that you saw in the video, which is called Romamu. And I already have been part of several student groups at Columbia, which is, by the way, I want to say, like, I wouldn't have been able to survive. I don't know, at least not as emotionally intact, my transition, if not for the support I got in college. So just FYI, I'm not telling anyone what to do, but for students, now might be a good time to come. Seriously though, there's a lot of, I've already met some of the queer Jews here on campus, and it seems to be a great community. But in general, it's for me, it was life-saving having that community. But it was also very helpful that it wasn't right away, because I can't even imagine having to transition straight out into the community.
There's actually, I was going to say the transition, sorry.
No?
To the following question.
I love it.
Good pun, yeah, pun of it. So here's...
You realize that most people have
I know, but I knew you'd appreciate that. So this question I have to read word for word. I don't want to get it wrong. It's a long question.
Okay.
Human Rights Campaign reported in 2021 was the worst year on record for violence against transgender persons. The thinking that normalizes violence isn't limited to any one community, but is strongly connected to religion. Challenging strongly held religious beliefs is a tough project. What strategies have you tried?
There's a good one. Here's the thing, and I know that might be controversial to some people to hear, but I was ordained, obviously, before I left, and then for a very long time, I would say between 2012 and 2019, I never used it, not just as a title or a descriptor. I used to tell people, if you're gonna call me rabbi, I'm gonna punch you in the face. I never actually did that. I don't advocate violence, but just saying, like, I was really not. And then I studied several summers in Jerusalem with a lot of other rabbis, and now, for the first time, I'm now on the boards of 2 organizations as a rabbi. So a lot has changed in that, but a big part of that kind of like journey was trying to grapple with that. Now, I really believe, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a rabbi, because as I've just described, I had no issue getting rid of being a rabbi. Just a weird thing to say, because I didn't forget everything that I studied and so on, but still, I don't think religion is at fault here. And if we want to talk about problems with organized religion, I could sit here the whole night and give you a lot of issues. I don't think treatment of LGBTQ community is necessarily a part of that. I think that it is used, religion is used by a lot of people as a good excuse. Oh, I'm not a hateful person. I'm not homophobic or transphobic because I like people who are different than me or people I don't understand. My boogeyman in the sky, which they call God, told me to do so, or so on. in my evidence for that, so to speak, I don't have an academic study, so all the professors in the room don't kill me, but my evidence for that, so to speak, though, at least with the Hasidic community, is I've gotten a lot of hate online from the Hasidic community. But in the winter of fall of 26, about a year after it came out, I published publicly the first source sheets of texts, like using some of the texts there and some of the other ones that are publicly available online on a website called Sefaria, and they're gonna provide the core for a book that I'm writing right now. But the first source sheet that was showing texts like the ones I just quoted, like looking on all the different genders in the Talmud, seeing the conventional creation story. There's like this Mishnah this Medrash who says that the first person was intersex, and like so on. Just like looking on a lot of those texts and being like, this isn't black and white. This isn't as clear. Like you can't just use religion as your excuse, because I can use religion just as much to argue that Judaism is totally queer. And the most hate to date at that time that I got ever from the religious Jewish communities was for publishing that search. It wasn't for going on TV. It wasn't for being in all the newspapers. It wasn't for getting other people. I was the first person who was raised Hasidic to come out of trans, and there have since been several other people, partially obviously empowered by that. It wasn't for any of that. It was for releasing a text study that shows that you could look within Judaism and find support for LGBTQ people. That showed me something very simple. These people, because if really your problem is that you think God hates trans people, then you see something like that, you should stop for a second and be like, oh, okay, maybe God doesn't hate trans people. But you see that reaction with so many religious people across religions who argue that their problem with LGBTQ people is religion, that when you try to actually ask them like, no, there's different ways of interpreting, there's different ways of looking at it, instead of stopping, they will start calling you names, they will push back, and instead of even engaging with you, they will just be like, oh, you're just a heretic. And that's not with everyone. There are people who you could actually have a conversation with, but the most hateful people, so that is very obviously showing that these people are not homophobic or transphobic because they are religious. They are religious because they're homophobic or transphobic almost. They use it. So I think that is the first thing that is very important, first and foremost, to realize. I think it is also very important to change the narrative. I am not in the business of kiruv, as we would call it, which is something Chabad is very good at. I don't care how religious people are. Even today, when I lead services, and I'm very involved in the Jewish community and lead a lot of, if you come up to me and you are like, I don't believe in Judaism, I don't want to be Jewish, and you are expecting me to try to convince you you should, you're not going to get anything from me. You're happy? Great, go on. I sincerely don't care, not in a way of like, I don't care, as in like, I don't have time for you. Honestly, you do you follow your beliefs, and I'm totally fine with that. But I do think it's important for those of us who do stay involved, whatever it's religious or spiritual, cultural communities, to reclaim this. To focus so much, like one of the big reasons why I wanted to have the bat mitzvah. It wasn't because I felt like if I don't do my name change at a Torah, it's not going to be real. I really didn't need it for that. I needed it because I wanted to celebrate with my community, but also because I wanted to show that this is a possibility. So much of my work and so many other people has been to reclaim the narrative, so to speak, from what would be called politically the religious right. And it's not just about LGBTQ, it's about LGBTQ, it's about immigration, it's about access to reproductive rights, it's about so many things. Because then they have kind of won the narrative in the sense of, the hate has won the narrative as in a lot of people who know very little about religion have bought into this, oh, this is against religion. And it's important to show that that is inaccurate. Anyway.
So now it is 8:15, so I want to give you a chance to, the last few minutes, to give us a takeaway that you want us to walk away from the evening with. And I will read one of the last question because it's a lovely question, and maybe you can integrate it if you want to or not. The question was, where did you get your courage to dispute your upbringing, to come out from this upbringing and find your true self? So if you want to integrate that into your parting words, you may, or if not, that's fine too.
So I can't really answer that question. And what I mean by that is, I get that a lot. Well, where did you get the courage? I don't know. I sometimes think back to it, and like I had that, for example, whenever I help other people who are leaving or transitioning, and I look on all the struggles, and I'm like, I sometimes have like, I guess you would call it a reverse culture shock. I'm like, oh my God, my family is really, like, that community is really intense. Like, how did I do it? I don't really know. Honestly, I think humans are more powerful than we give ourselves credit sometimes. When there's a necessity to do something, we go with it. And I think for me, the options weren't like coming out and being happy or not coming out and being miserable. It was coming out and being alive, not coming out and I don't know what would be. Like, it was a really necessity of it. I will say that the things that helped were finding community, finding other people, both in the Jewish community, LGBTQ community, and so on. I wouldn't have been able to do it without that. I personally really relied on finding like an outlet to sometimes disengage from yourself and giving ourselves permission to do that. I think specifically I come from New York City, which has that kind of mentality, but I think this entire country has that mentality of like, you constantly have to like run and do. And I kind of like, almost like in the Hasidic community, in the religious community, that's bittul Torah. Like, you're not allowed to waste a second. You can't just relax, and you need to feel guilty if you don't work 24/7 and so on. And like, kind of giving myself permission to just be like, today I want to be onesie in PJs in bed the whole day, and that's okay. And like doing stuff that work for you, which I think at its core, Shabbat to me, that's what Shabbat is. Make a short stop. You can't do anything. Today don't work. Today don't go anywhere. Don't do anything. Just relax. That was also very important. I think that gave me a lot of the energy. But talking of, I'm going to ignore the refusing to shut up. That's just who I am. But I think my goal and the mission that I really want people to understand is like, let's call this a three-layer plan. I want every person to know that you're not alone. I want you to know you can do it. And I think as a world and as a community, we can do it. And I think that is also talking about like the Human Rights Campaign, statistics, and a lot of other people. It's like, it sometimes feels, and I don't want to talk shit about the South. I'm not here to do that. But specifically looking on so many laws here and so many other, like I constantly have to sometimes remind myself that I live in I studied public policy in college actually. And so like from a political and policy perspective, I have to remind myself that I live in a bubble in New York. We're one of the few states that have like, it's illegal to have single stroll bathrooms being gendered. Like if you harass you being transphobic in public, you can get fined. Like I'm talking like Roe v. Wade, ex-abortion is codified into our constitution. Like I sometimes have to remind myself that the rest of the country is not that. And it's sometimes, specifically over the past few years, there are currently somewhere around 50 bills directly targeting trans people and like legalizing discrimination against trans people in about 30 different states. And it could feel like, what is happening? And I have the same with religious communities and so on. Like you think you have accomplished something, it feels like you go one step forward and two steps back. I do think that we need to sometimes zoom out and look on the bigger picture. We are in an infinitely better world when it comes to the LGBTQ community, and the same with so many other things, than we were even 10 years ago. At the same time, though, that brings out new problems. There's a lot more targeted discrimination, and 2021 was the year with the most targeted killings, literal killings of trans women, specifically trans women of color, and so on. So there's a lot of, like, obviously a lot of pushback that happens, and I think the same is what we see with racism, the same we see with a lot of other issues. But I do believe, and I also, having studied public policy and having studied the history of the world, but of the country and of this country, I don't think I'm being too optimistic to say that we can accomplish that. When I was talking about not tolerating but celebrating, I really do think we can get it. I'm gonna do one. Yeah, obviously we're not gonna do questions anymore, but I just wanna pull that up. If any of you are in the mood of stalking me online, feel free to do so. And there's a link for the book if you want to get it. So ultimately, but this link is going to take you to a list of websites, everything from Amazon, which I'm not a huge fan of, but a lot of one of my favorite websites if you want to look to buy the book. There's a website called indiebound.com, and if you put it in there, it will give you local bookstores that are selling the book locally, and you can just order it online or directly. There's social media. I also have TikTok. I didn't put it on there because I rarely post anything. Literally, my entire TikTok consists of a few videos of me making challah and kugel, and like it's just food. And I'm not that good at it. I haven't figured it out yet. But feel free to stay in touch.
Thank you so much. Thank you.